In the quiet of a room, where the air hangs still and heavy with the weight of centuries, a single object rests behind reinforced glass. It's an iron spearhead, dark and unassuming, yet bound by bands of silver and gold. It looks less like a weapon and more like a Septura relic from an age of faith and fire. This isn't just any museum display. The hushed reverence feels closer to that of a chapel. Visitors speak in whispers, their footsteps echoing softly on the stone floor, as if they've entered a space where history itself is holding its breath. This is the Holy Lance, the Spear of Destiny. According to legend, it is more than just iron and precious metal. It is an artifact said to bend the very arc of history, a silent witness to the rise and fall of empires. The whispers that surround it claim that whoever possesses it holds the fate of the world in their hands. It is a point that is said to have pierced not just flesh, but time itself, a spear that seems to know the path that history will take, choosing its masters and deciding the outcome of battles before they are even fought. Its story begins in the muted verses of an ancient text. The Gospel of John tells of a Roman soldier who, at the foot of the cross, pierced the side of Christ to confirm his passing, an act of grim duty, a final, quiet moment in a story that would reshape the world. Later traditions would give this soldier a name Longinus and transform him from a mere functionary into a figure of legend, the first to be touched by the spear's nascent power. But the scriptural account is sparse, leaving room for centuries of interpretation, for faith and folklore to fill the silence. And fill it they did. Over time, this simple spearhead became a vessel for the hopes and fears of millions. Imagine the endless procession of pilgrims, their hands clasped in prayer, their eyes fixed on this sliver of metal. Think of the emperors and kings who sought it, believing it would grant them divine right and invincibility on the battlefield. Each generation pressed its own desires, its own ambitions, and its own anxieties into the cold iron. Relics like this are not just objects. They are maps of human longing, charting the territories of our deepest beliefs and our most fervent wishes. But which lance is the true one? History is rarely so simple. As the legend grew, so too did the number of lances claiming the title. One was revered in the grand city of Constantinople. Another was said to have been discovered by crusaders in the besieged city of Antioch. Today, lances reside in Vienna and in Echmiadzin, Armenia, each with its own compelling chronicle, each a point of power, drawing faith toward it. How did a single wound on a distant hillside blossom into so many competing claims? The answer lies not just in history, but in the power of belief itself. This single object becomes a crossroads where theology, politics, and warfare intersect. It's a story told in the glitter of crowns, the clash of swords, and the quiet illumination of monastery scripts. Belief in this artifact has moved armies, justified conquests, and anointed rulers. It is a tangible piece of a story so powerful that men were willing to live and die for the chance to hold it, to feel its connection to the divine. The spear is a testament to the idea that what we believe can be as potent as any army, as solid as any fortress wall. As we gaze at it now, under the soft gallery light, the gold binding seems to pulse with a faint inner warmth. Before there were emperors, before there were dates and battles recorded in history books, there was simply a wound, a moment of piercing that would echo through eternity. And from that moment, the first stories of the spear's journey began to unfold. Imagine a windswept hill just outside ancient Jerusalem. The air is heavy, filled with a silence that follows a great and terrible event. It's here, in the Gospel of John, chapter 19, that our story begins. A Roman soldier, just another face in the occupying force, takes his lance and pierces the side of Jesus on the cross. The text says it was to confirm his death, a final, almost bureaucratic act. But in that moment, something shifted. That simple iron spearhead, used for a grim task, was set on a path to become one of history's most enigmatic and revered objects. The Holy Lance. But who was this soldier? The Gospels don't give him a name. He is simply one of the soldiers. This anonymity is a powerful thing. It creates a space, a void that human curiosity and faith rush to fill. Over time, stories began to swirl around this nameless figure. In later apocryphal texts, Like the Gospel of Nicodemus, he is finally given an identity. Tradition tells us that when blood and water flowed from the wound, some splashed into his eyes, curing him of an ailment and leading to his conversion. The nameless enforcer becomes a saint. The story of the spear is inseparable from the story of the man who wielded it. A man born from legend. As the centuries passed, the physical object itself began to surface in the historical record. The first whispers of a holy spear being venerated appear in the accounts of pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. A traveler from Piacenza in the late 6th century wrote of seeing the lance in Jerusalem, displayed in the Basilica of Mount Zion. He noted the lance with which our Lord was struck in the side. These early accounts are brief, tantalizing glimpses. They tell us that, within a few hundred years, a specific object was being identified and honored as the very spear from the crucifixion. From Jerusalem, the trail leads to the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople. This wasn't just a city, it was the reliquary of the Christian world, a spiritual fortress packed with the most sacred objects imaginable. Emperors understood the power of these relics. To possess them was to possess a direct link to the divine, a tangible piece of sacred history. By the 10th century, historical records confirm that a holy lance was prominently displayed in the pharaoh's chapel. Alongside other passion relics, emperors would parade these treasures before the people and visiting dignitaries, using them to bind the empire to heaven, to show that their rule was divinely sanctioned. The spear wasn't just a piece of iron anymore. It was an instrument of imperial legitimacy. But how does a common soldier's weapon become a conduit of divine power? This is the logic of relics. In medieval theology, it wasn't just about the object itself. There was the concept of presence, the belief that the sacredness of the person or event could be transferred to things they touched. The spear, having touched Christ, was imbued with a holy power. It became more than its physical components. It was a fragment of a sacred moment, a contact relic that carried the echo of divinity. This belief explains why even a piece of the spear, or an object that had merely touched the spear, could be considered powerful. Of course, a historian will point out that soon, multiple lances claimed to be the true Holy Lance. One in Constantinople, another that would later appear in Antioch during the First Crusade, and eventually the one in Vienna. But to dismiss the story here is to miss the point. For the medieval mind, this multiplicity wasn't necessarily a problem or a sign of fraud. Faith was a vast and mysterious landscape. The power of the relic was in the devotion it inspired. Each spear, in its own city, served the same purpose. It made the sacred story tangible, bringing believers closer to the divine. The authenticity was rooted in faith, not just in carbon dating. The quiet murmur of prayers, in Greek and Latin, the scent of incense from a swinging brass thurible, these were the sensory proofs of the spear's power. It was real because it made God feel real. And so, from a dusty hill in Judea, the spear travels through story and scripture, through pilgrim diaries and imperial inventories. Imagine now, the heavy doors of a chapel in Constantinople swinging open. The dim, prayerful light gives way to a blaze of gold, mosaics, and imperial splendor. The Arhams with the power of an empire at its zenith. And there, held aloft, is a spear, no longer a simple soldier's weapon, but a symbol of divine right, a cornerstone of a Christian emperor's claim to rule the world. In the echoing halls of Constantinople, the air is thick with incense and the low murmur of prayer. Picture this: a triumphant emperor returning from the frontiers, not just with spoils, but with a symbol, a lance, presented to him before the thronged masses of the hippodrome. It's more than just a weapon. It is a piece of heaven, a relic carefully managed and displayed. In Byzantium, the politics of showing a sacred object, and to whom is as complex as any battlefield strategy. These lances, said to have touched holy figures, are not merely revered. They are instruments of statecraft, their public appearances reinforcing the divine right of the emperor. Now, let this image dissolve and reform in the chillier, rough-hewn world of the West. The Carolingians, and later the Antonians, are forging a new empire from the fragments of the old. Here, the lance takes on an even more potent identity. it becomes the Holy Lance, a cornerstone of the imperial regalia. This isn't just any spear. Look closer. A nail, whispered to be from the true cross, is said to be hammered into its blade, bound with sleeves of silver and gold. It is an object of immense spiritual power, a physical link to the divine. This is the lance that Otto the Great carries. Chroniclers, writing with the benefit of hindsight, will tell you that his victories were foreordained, that destiny marched beside this spear at the Battle of the Lechfeld. They weave a narrative where the lance isn't just a symbol of his authority, but the very source of his success. It becomes a talisman, its story growing with each telling, each victory adding another layer to its legend. It's how history is might a deed is done. And then the poets and scribes attach meaning to it, like pinning a medal on a hero's chest. Imagine the weight of it all. The coronation procession. First, the orb, a golden world in the emperor's hand, heavy and complete. Then the crown, a circlet of celestial authority settling onto his brow. The sword, its hilt, cool, its scabbard, creaking softly, a promise of justice and defense. And then, the lance. It is not held like a weapon, but cradled like a sacred text. The texture of its wooden shaft, worn smooth by centuries of hands, the glint of metal on the velvet cushion carrying it. Each piece in this sequence is a tactile affirmation of power, a tangible piece of the imperial puzzle. For these rulers, often governing vast and unruly territories, the lance is a portable covenant. It is a piece of sacred history they can carry with them. From Aachen to Rome, a physical anchor for their often uneasy authority. It lends a borrowed, sacred weight to their rule, a way to steady a crown that sits heavily on any head. Think of the hands that have touched it, the artisans who've repaired it. You can see the history in its very material. A new band of silver added by one emperor, an inscription etched by another. It's a living document, changed and shaped by time. Its story told not just in chronicles, but in the very scratches and repairs on its surface. The distant sound of a herald's trumpet, the quiet scratch of a scribe's quill documenting its journey. These are the sounds that surround it. But the story of sacred spears is not confined to the gilded halls of empire. Far from the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, a dry wind whips across a parched landscape. A different banner is about to be lifted over a starving, desperate city. Here, under the relentless sun of the east, another spear is about to be found, changing the course of a holy war and the fate of thousands. Our story now moves to Antioch. The year is 1098. Imagine a city under siege, not from without, but from within. The Crusaders, who had so triumphantly captured the great city of Antioch just months before, are now the ones trapped. A massive Turkish army has arrived, and the hunters have become the hunted. Food has run out. Horses, then dogs, then leather straps are boiled for sustenance. Starvation gnaws at their bellies, and a deeper hunger for hope eats at their souls. Rain, relentless and cold, drums against their shields, mirroring the despair gathering in their hearts. Defeat isn't just a possibility. It feels like a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. In this grim theater of desperation, a single voice cuts through the gloom. A poor pilgrim from Provence, a man named Peter Bartholomew, steps forward with a fantastic claim. He says he's been receiving visits from St. Andrew himself. The apostle, he insists, has shown him the exact location of the most sacred of relics, the Holy Lance, the very spear that pierced the side of Christ on the cross, buried for centuries beneath the floor of the city's cathedral of St. Peter. Leaders of the crusade are skeptical. Adimar of Le Puy, the respected papal legate, dismisses Peter as a charlatan, but Raymond of Toulouse, another powerful count, is willing to listen. Hope, however fragile, is a resource they cannot afford to waste. So, on a dark, stormy night, a small, chosen group enters the cathedral. By the flickering light of torches, they begin to dig. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and low, murmured prayers. Hours pass. The pit deepens. Nothing. Doubt begins to creep back in, colder than the stone floor. Then, Peter Bartholomew himself leaps into the pit. digging with a renewed frenzy. A short while later, a cry, a scraping sound of metal against stone. He lifts something from the clods of wet earth. It's a simple, rusted iron point. A collective gasp ripples through the small crowd. In the wavering torchlight, it seems to glow with an otherworldly light. The effect is electric. News of the discovery spreads through the starving army like wildfire. This is no mere piece of iron. It's a sign from God. Their suffering has meaning. Their cause is just. Divine favor is with them. The skeletal, famished men are transformed. Their sunken eyes now burn with holy fire. Morale, once buried under despair. Source, faith becomes its own form of nourishment. A force more potent than any tactical plan. The leaders decide to stake everything on one desperate final gambit, a breakout charge against an enemy that vastly outnumbers them. With the Holy Lance carried at the head of their column, the gates of Antioch groan open. The Crusaders pour out onto the plain, not as a retreating rabble, but as an avenging host. The sight of the relic, held aloft, and the sheer, unholy ferocity of the charging knights stuns the Turkish forces. What should have been a slaughter becomes a miraculous victory. The Crusaders, powered by a conviction forged in starvation and vision, shatter the besieging army. Faith, it seems, can be as decisive as steel. But the story of the lance doesn't end in glorious victory. As the initial euphoria fades, the old doubts resurfaced, stronger than before. Many, including the influential Bohemond of Toronto, openly question the relic's authenticity and Peter Bartholomew's motives. The whispers grow into a roar of controversy to prove the divine truth of his vision and the lance's power. Peter agrees to an ordeal by fire. He is to walk through a blazing corridor of flames, protected by God. Accounts of what happened next are confused. Peter emerges from the inferno, horribly burned. He lingers in agony for days before succumbing to his injuries. Was it a sign of his falsehood, or was he a martyr, killed by an unruly crowd mobbing him after he passed the test? His death leaves the lance shrouded in an aura of contested, tragic power. So, what became of this controversial, world-altering artifact? Its trail begins to fade almost immediately. Raymond of Toulouse carried it with him as the crusade moved towards Jerusalem. But after his death, its history becomes murky. It was claimed to be in Constantinople for a time, then disappeared during the chaos of the Fourth Crusade. Was it lost, hidden, destroyed? The object itself vanished, but its story, the memory of that desperate hope it ignited within Antioch's walls, lingered for centuries. It is a powerful reminder of how a story can become more enduring than the physical thing it describes. The Lance of Antioch reminds us that on the battlefield, hope is a form of logistics, and a timely vision can be the most effective strategy of all. Even as its physical trace disappears, the idea of it echoes in quieter places in the cloisters and treasuries of Europe, where other lances would later appear, claiming the same sacred heritage, competing for the title of the one true relic. Vienna, Austria. Inside the imperial treasury of the Hofburg Palace, behind thick glass, lies a spear. It's not just any spear. This is the Hofburg Lance, also known as the Spear of Destiny. Look closely at its form. An ancient iron point, winged and elegant, is held together by intricate bands of gold and silver. A section is wrapped in silver wire, and set into the blade is a small, bent piece of iron, a pin. Or as centuries of believers have claimed, a nail from the true cross itself, hammered into the spear that pierced Christ's side. This extraordinary object came into the hands of the Holy Roman Emperors, eventually passing to the Habsburg dynasty, who saw it not just as a relic, but as a symbol of their divine right to rule. For hundreds of years, it was the ultimate emblem of power, a tangible link between earthly authority and heavenly mandate. But Vienna doesn't hold the only claim. Travel back in time to the 13th century, to Paris, and the court of the pious king, Louis IX. Fresh from the Crusades, Louis acquired a treasure trove of relics from the financially struggling Latin emperor of Constantinople. Among them was the tip of the Holy Lance. To house this and other precious artifacts, he built one of the most breathtaking spaces in the world. Imagine it. A chapel made almost entirely of stained glass, where the lance fragment would have glowed in the colored light. a jewel among jewels. It became a centerpiece of French royal devotion. But history is rarely kind to such treasures. During the French Revolution's fervor, Sainte-Chapelle was desecrated, its relics scattered. The point of the lance vanished, its sacred story dissolving into the chaos of history. Now, let's journey east, to the highlands of Armenia, to the Echmiadzin Cathedral, one of the oldest in the world. Here, another spearhead is housed, one deeply woven into the nation's identity. The Echmiadzin lance is different in form, a leaf-shaped blade with a distinct cross carved into its center. Legend holds that it was brought to Armenia by the Apostle Thaddeus himself. For centuries, it remained a cherished secret, a protector of the Armenian people. It would surface only at moments of profound crisis or celebration, brought out to bless the faithful or to offer a silent warning against invaders. It wasn't a symbol of imperial conquest like Vienna's lance, but a deeply personal, national talisman. Its power rooted in the unwavering faith of a people who have endured so much. And what of Rome, the heart of the Catholic Church? For centuries, Rome also claimed to possess the Holy Lance, a gift from a sultan to Pope Innocent VIII in the 15th century. It was kept within St. Peter's Basilica itself, one of the four most important relics housed within the massive pillars supporting Michelangelo's dome. While its authenticity was later questioned by the church itself, its power was undeniable. Imagine the grand processions on Good Friday, the spear carried through the Vatican, its presence felt by thousands, even if the object itself was kept at a distance. Rome understood that the power of a relic isn't just in its physical presence, but in its ritual absence space it occupies in the hearts and minds of the faithful. This created a profound sense of shared belief, a community united by a story. So we have 4 cities, 4 lances, each with its own history, its own claim, its own legend. Vienna, Paris, Echmiadzin, Rome. In the medieval world, this multiplicity wasn't a problem. It was an ecosystem of faith. Each relic was nested within its own city's story, a source of local pride and divine protection. It raises the ultimate question: does power flow from the cold, hard metal of the object itself, or does it emanate from the communities that believe in it, from the collective hope, faith, and devotion poured into it over generations? The hushed whispers of tourists in the Hofburg fade beneath the imagined echoes of ancient chants. The scent of dripping wax and old stone fills the air. The answer seems to lie somewhere in the space between the object and the observer, in the story that binds them together. Let's return to Vienna, to that spear behind the glass. Look closer at the golden bands that hold the blade together. See how they have been polished by time and touch. Follow the shadow casts. By a single rivet, that shadow leads us away from emperors and popes, away from grand cathedrals and imperial treasuries. It leads us back into the heat and noise of a workshop, to the clang of a hammer on an anvil, toward the skilled hands that first forged this metal, that repaired it, that adorned it, remaking it again and again across the long stretch of centuries. Listen closely. Can you hear it? The faint, rhythmic tap of a goldsmith's hammer, centuries ago. This isn't the clang of a battlefield, but the careful, reverent work of hands tasked with preserving a sacred object. For relics like the Vienna lance, their lives didn't end with their discovery. They began anew. Goldsmiths and armorers became their caretakers, framing them in gold, wrapping them in silver wire, reinforcing their fragile forms. Every rivet, every new plate, was an act of devotion, artistry, as an expression of faith. The metal wasn't just being repaired, it was being adorned, elevated, its story embellished with precious materials. This work continues today, but the tools have changed. Step from the firelit workshop into the sterile quiet of a modern lab. Here, the air hums not with hammers, but with the gentle sigh of climate control systems. Instead of a jeweler's loop, we have electron microscopes and X-ray machines. Scientists, in their own act of reverence, peer into the very soul of the metal. They are not trying to debunk the legend, but to read the history written within the object itself. X-ray fluorescence reveals the lance's elemental makeup. Metallography, the study of the metal's internal structure, shows how it was forged, heated, and cooled. These tests tell a complex story. They suggest the blade of the Vienna lance could date to the 8th century. A Carolingian era wings the gold sleeve that binds it, bearing the inscription Lancia iti clavis Domini, the lance and nail of the Lord, was added later, likely in the 14th century under Charles IV. The medal itself whispers of alterations, additions, a life of constant transformation. Certainty, that clean, simple answer we crave, eludes us. The medal, like the legend, holds its secrets close. And then there's the nail, embedded within the blade, held by twists of silver wire, is a small piece of iron, long identified as one of the nails from the crucifixion. Or is it? Analysis has been inconclusive. Some tests suggest it's a Roman-era nail, consistent with the claim. Others argue its shape and composition don't quite match. Science offers possibilities, probabilities, but it must pause at the threshold of faith. It can describe the object, measure it, date its components, but it cannot measure its sacred power. Here, in the quiet click of a microscope focusing, is a profound humility. Look closer at the surface. That soft, dark sheen is patina, time's own handwriting on the metal. See where the edges are smoothed and blunted? That's not from battle, but from the touch of countless hands. Over 1,000 years, popes, pilgrims, all reaching out to connect with its story. The very cases built to protect these relics are part of their narrative, both a reliquary and a shield. Every decision to clean, to restore, or to leave untouched is an act of storytelling. Do you remove the patina of ages to reveal the original surface, or do you preserve the evidence of its long journey? There is no single right answer, and the Vienna lance is not alone. Its story echoes in other lances, forged in different hands, in different lands. Imagine the workshops in Armenia, where the Echmiadzin lance was housed, or the Byzantine ateliers in Constantinople, where artisans blended Roman traditions with Eastern aesthetics. In each place skilled hands anonymous, to history linked to their faith, to their tools, hammering steel and belief into a single, powerful form. A piece of cloth buffs the metal to a soft glow. A tiny hammer secures a setting. These are the sensory details of devotion, the physical acts that sustain a legend through time. But the life of the spear isn't confined to the lab or the museum vault. As the cold light of scientific scrutiny fades, the warm glow of lamplight takes its place. The story of the metal flows out, becoming a story for us all. It leaves the hands of the historian and enters the imagination of the poet, the painter, the composer. They hear not just the ring of the hammer, but the resonance of a symbol. In the heart of medieval romance, there lies a wound that will not heal. It belongs to a king, the Fisher King, or the Grail King, and as he suffers, his lands turn to waste. This is the core of the Grail cycle, a tapestry woven from threads of Christian piety and older, stranger Celtic echoes. At the center of this story is not just the famous cup, but also a weapon, a spear that ceaselessly bleeds from its tip. It is the spear of Longinus, the Verlan said to have pierced the side of Christ on the cross, now a sacred, sorrowful relic. The story tells us this spear was used to wound the king, and the kingdom fell with him. The land becomes barren, mirroring his pain. The streams no longer flow, the crops fail, and the court is shrouded in a silent grief. It is a powerful image. The health of the leader and the health of the land are one and the same. To heal the wasteland, one must first heal the king. But how? The answer lies not in medicine or magic, but in a question asked with pure intent by a prophesied hero. Enter Parsifal, te holy fool, the innocent knight, destined for the Grail Castle. In his first visit, he sees the bleeding spear and the suffering king, but bound by a foolish rule of chivalry not to ask too many questions, he remains silent. He fails. The world's suffering continues because of his hesitation. It's a profound lesson. Sometimes, the greatest failure is inaction, but stories of redemption are potent. Parsifal spends years wandering, learning wisdom through hardship, until he earns a second chance. When he finally returns, he is no longer the naive boy. He has understood that true chivalry is not about rules, but about compassion. He asks the vital question: whom does the Grail serve? And with that the spell is broken. He takes the spear, touches it to the king's wound, and the king is healed. The rivers flow again, and the land turns green. The spear that caused the wound is the only thing that can heal it. The myth teaches us a crucial lesson about balance. A power used for harm can, in the right hands, be used for restoration. It's not the object itself that is good or evil, but the intention behind its use. This story of the wounded king and his healing migrated from fireside tales and handwritten manuscripts into the grand halls of art and music. In paintings, we see the Roman soldier, Longinus, at the foot of the cross. Early depictions show him as a simple functionary of empire, a brute carrying out an order, but over centuries, his portrayal softens. His gaze shifts from one of blind violence to one of dawning recognition, even awe, as the sacred blood touches his eyes and, according to legend, cures his blindness. He becomes a symbol of conversion, the first to see the divine through an act of violence. The weapon of torment becomes an instrument of revelation. It was the 19th century romantics, however, who truly enshrined a spear in the temple of modern myth. In an age of burgeoning nationalism, artists and thinkers looked to the medieval past to forge a new identity for the future. Richard Wagner, in his epic opera, Parsifal Astris, took the story and magnified it. The music swells, distant harps and muted horns rise from the orchestra pit, and the Grail Castle comes alive on stage. The audience, seated in the hush of a red-curtained hall, is no longer just watching a story. They are participating in a ritual. The spear is no longer just a relic. It is a symbol of national and spiritual destiny. On the canvases of pre-Raphaelite painters and in the stanzas of romantic poets, the lance is reforged, its sharp, historical edges softened into a lesson on empathy and redemption. The story becomes a myth that teaches us not about warfare, but about healing. But as the velvet curtain falls on the 19th century's grand theater of myth, a new, more dangerous act is about to begin. Beyond the opera house doors, a darker century waits in the wings. In this new era, the spear's name will be invoked, not for spiritual healing, but for political power. Its symbolic weight will become entangled with occult fascinations and ideologies that twist its meaning, turning a story of compassion into a justification for conquest. The story of the Holy Lands, as we've known it, is a tapestry of faith, legend, and imperial power. But as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, a new, darker thread was woven into its history. The air in Vienna was thick with change, a restless energy that pulsed through its grand avenues and hushed salons. In the heart of the city, within the imperial treasury of the Hofburg Palace, the lance rested among the regalia of the Holy Roman Empire. For centuries, it had been a symbol of divine right and imperial authority. But in an era of rising nationalism and brewing conflict, its meaning began to shift. It was no longer just a relic. It became a focus for new, potent myth. The early 20th century saw a surge of interest in occultism and esoteric history. In cities like Vienna and Munich, societies and writers began to weave tales that endowed the lance with world-altering power. They whispered that whoever possessed it held the destiny of the world in their hands. This wasn't history. It was a modern myth, born from a desire for hidden knowledge and secret control in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. These stories took the historical object to iron spearhead and cloaked it in an aura of supernatural destiny, a narrative far removed from the sober records of the imperial treasury. Then, the shadows of war fell across Europe. In 1938, with the annexation of Austria, the imperial regalia, including the lance, were ordered moved from Vienna. A special train carried them under guard to Nuremberg, a city heavy with its own new symbolism. There, the artifacts were put on display, their historical significance co-opted for a new, dark, political theater. The myth of the Spear of Destiny gained traction, fueled by propaganda that twisted history into a tool for ambition. The lance, once a symbol of a pan-European Christian empire, was now being presented as an icon of a singular, nationalist destiny. As Allied bombs began to fall on Nuremberg, the regalia were moved again, this time to a specially constructed bunker deep beneath the city's castle, intended to protect them from the destruction above. There they remained, through the roar of air raids and the final, desperate battles of the war. In April 1945, American forces, acting on intelligence, located the hidden bunker. They broke through its thick concrete walls and found the treasures of an empire lying in the dark, silent and waiting. Among them was the lance. The moment of its recovery was carefully documented, a quiet and procedural end to its dramatic wartime journey. After the war, the legal and diplomatic process began to return the regalia to their rightful home. In 1946, the lance, along with the rest of the collection, was formally handed back to Austrian officials. It traveled once more, not as a prize of war or a mystical talisman, but as a piece of cultural heritage being restored. It returned to the Hofburg treasury, where it had rested for centuries. The fevered myths of the preceding decades began to cool, but they never vanished entirely. They lingered in popular books and sensationalist documentaries, a testament to how easily history can be reimagined to serve the needs of the present. Why do such myths take hold, especially in times of great upheaval? When faced with catastrophe and uncertainty, we often seek patterns, explanations, and symbols that can contain our anxieties and hopes. An ancient object like the lance becomes a perfect vessel. We project onto it our desire for power, our fear of fate, and our hope for a destiny we can control. The cold, hard iron of the artifact becomes secondary to the story we tell about it. Today, back in its museum case in Vienna, the lance is separated from us by a pane of glass. This barrier feels symbolic. It's a boundary between the object itself, a complex, layered piece of medieval ironwork. The web of projections we have cast upon it. The glass separates the factual, tangible history from the intoxicating, dangerous myth. Looking at it now, you can almost hear the faint echo of a train's brakes in the night, the rustle of an archivist's file, the distant, fading siren. These are the real sounds of its 20th century journey, far quieter than the legends, but far more profound. Stepping away from the quiet of the treasury and back into the daylight, one has to wonder why these object spears, swords, scepters so consistently represent the very idea of power and rule. It pulls us toward a deeper question about human nature, about the symbols we create, and the enduring belief that destiny can somehow be held in the hand. Across cultures and continents, certain shapes seem to resonate with our need for order and purpose. A pointed length of wood or metal. For instance, a spear. This object, born from the simple need to hunt or defend, has been elevated time and time again into a symbol of authority, a focal point for destiny itself. Consider Gungnir, the spear of Odin in Norse mythology. It was said to never miss its mark, a tool of absolute will. Moritantat. It was an object of profound solemnity. Oaths sworn upon its point were unbreakable, binding fate itself. The spear wasn't just a weapon. It was a physical manifestation of a promise, a contract between gods and mortals, held sharp and true. Travel south to the misty shores of Ireland, and you'll find the Spear of Law. This wasn't a symbol of calm, unwavering authority, but of immense, untamable power. Law's spear was so alive, so eager for battle, that it had to be kept in a cauldron of water or sleeping potions too, prevent it from bursting into flame and consuming everything around it. Here, authority is depicted as a barely contained force of nature, a power that must be respected and carefully managed, lest it bring ruin. It's a reminder that leadership carries with it immense, sometimes dangerous, responsibility. This idea isn't confined to European myths. Look to the regal courts of many African kingdoms, where ornate spears are not for war, but for ceremony. They are held by rulers as extensions of their reach, symbols of their right to govern and protect their people. The delicate beadwork might rustle, a sound as potent as a king's decree. In Polynesia, the taiaha, a spear-like staff, is both a weapon and an instrument of oratory, used to punctuate speeches and command the attention of the assembly. The point doesn't just threaten, it directs, it appoints, it taps a shoulder, and calls an individual to service. It's a tool for weaving people together. This is the core of it, isn't it? These objects, spears, staves, even the military standards and colors that armies rally around, they are physical contracts, They are things that help a group cohere, transforming a crowd into a community with a shared purpose. They provide a story we agree to tell together. A spear doesn't truly control destiny on its own. Its power comes from the collective consent of those who gather around it, who invested with meaning and agree to follow where it points. It channels the will of the many through the hand of the one. So, we return to the quiet spear in its display case. The lights gleam on its polished surface. In that reflection, we don't just see ourselves. We can see the countless hands that have held such objects throughout history. The hand of the hunter, the warrior, the chieftain, the queen. You can almost hear the echoes they left behind. The distant thrum of a drum, the soft whisper of wind through pines, the crash of surf on a reef half a world away. Each sound is a story, a different future, charted by the point of a spear. If a single object can hold so many stories, so many potential futures within its simple form, what do we choose to entrust to it now? What promises do we make upon its point? What direction do we ask it to show us? The shape remains the same, but the story it tells is always up to us. It's morning. Before the crowds arrive, a museum is a place of quiet reverence. A guard's key turns in an old lock, the heavy door swings inward, and a beam of early light finds its target. A simple point of iron, resting in its glass case. For centuries, they've called it the Spear of Destiny. We began this journey with a single object, a single wound. But we found that one point can branch into many. This spear has been a mirror, reflecting the ambitions of empires, the devotion of saints, the visions of artists, and the deepest fears and hopes of humanity. We've seen it held by Roman centurions, Carolingian kings, Holy Roman emperors, and would-be conquerors. Each claimed it, and each, in turn, was claimed by history. But look at it now. It's just iron. Cold, silent, humble. This metal has outlived the hands that forged it, and the kings who brandished it. It is a relic that cannot speak. Its power, its story, exists only because we choose to tell it. We are the ones who give it a voice. And in that telling, we find a gentle distinction between legend and record. History gives us the facts, the dates, the battles, the treaties. But legend gives us the meaning. It explains why we gather in places like this, why we are drawn to stories of power and purpose, why we kneel in moments of faith and rise in moments of conviction. We need both the recorded fact and the whispered myth to understand who we are. One tells us what happened, the other tells us why it matters. This brings us to an invitation inward. Forget, for a moment, the emperors and the legends. Consider the lances in your own life. What are the tools, the texts, the symbols that guide your choices? What are the principles you hold, the beliefs that give you direction when you stand at a crossroads? These are your spears of destiny. They may not promise control over the world, but they offer you command of yourself. This is the true role of places like this museum, or the monasteries and archives that have guarded this spear through the ages. They are not keepers of ultimate power, but keepers of essential questions. They preserve these objects, not as trophies, but as prompts for reflection, reminding us that the future is not a single, predetermined path. The display case is gently closed. Footsteps fade on the stone floor. Outside, the city awakens, and the day begins. The grand arc of destiny is not forged in a single, dramatic moment. It is shaped by 1,000 small decisions, 1,000,000 quiet choices made by ordinary people every single day. The choice to be kind, the choice to be curious, the choice to listen. That is where real power lies. If this quiet journey through history has stirred something in you, please like the video and subscribe for more explorations into the myths that shape our world. In the comments below, I'd love to know which version of the Lance's story speaks to you the most, and what do you believe it truly controls? Thank you for watching.